Heb has been in the construction industry for almost 30 years. Over that time, the industry's attitudes towards health and safety have changed dramatically. Although we have made huge progress, we need to continually educate and improve all aspects of site safety. Although we think we've put all the best processes and procedures in place, something totally unforeseen can be a cruel reminder that we should think more carefully about all potential hazards in our working environment. We at Heb are making this programme to share an experience of a cruel reminder that we had, in the hope that you may learn and avoid a similar incident.
Mobile plant technology has reached high levels of sophistication, especially over the last 20 years. Computers make our life easier with checking lift weights, load weights, lift parameters. Much of the increased technology has increased safety to people, plant and property, but we still have the human error factor that causes most of our accidents, and often not due to just one person, they are due to a number of people, situations and circumstances. It was a combination of those circumstances that caused the frightening crane accident here at Triangle Road in Henderson.
In 2010, Heb Construction were contracted to build a cycleway bridge immediately adjacent to an existing busy road bridge spanning the Huhu tidal creek. Cranes were needed to position 8 22-tonne concrete beams onto piles across the creek.
Well, at the start of the project, we received this geotip report. This was completed to determine how the piles were to be built. We use this information to base our piling methodology and also for our crane establishment.
Under normal circumstances, the crane lift would be straightforward, but this location was on the banks of a muddy creek with confined space and adjacent to a main road with major power lines running directly above.
We originally discussed options of lifting off the bridge and under the wires, but we had concerns about the bridge capacity and loadings. Shane also suggested tandem lifting, but there just wasn't enough space.
There was also some discussion about a temporary bridge. We decided against that because there's no room for a crawler crane to set up.
We independently came up with the option of using 2 200-tonne cranes, one each side of the creek.
Well, in June 2010 we started bringing gravel in and we built the pads for the piling operations. We later increased those pads to allow for the cranes. In total we used about 1,800 tonnes for the 2 pads.
As I got closer to the date for the lift, I gave Shane our lifting plan from Auckland Cranes. He then put a method statement together with the supporting operations about a week before the lift.
At that time we added another 500 tonnes to the north platform. This is so the crane could operate safely.
I had some concerns about the north platform. It was still been under construction, so I came to check it the day before and asked Shane to extend the pad out a bit more.
We rolled in another 35 tonnes of gravel as I agreed with Roger. A bit more gravel was not a major and we didn't want to take any chances.
Thursday, August 5th, 2010. With the pads built and the correct safety procedures in place, everyone was ready for the lift. Ron Graham has been a crane driver for almost 40 years. That morning was like any other. He had a standard lift of a 20-tonne beam with a 200-tonne capacity DMAG crane. This was nothing new for Roger either. 30 years in the business, he's an operational lift supervisor and often works with his mate Ron. Little did either know that this day was to be the most dramatic day of their lives, and one they would never forget.
Your left, keep slowing down, winching it down and luffing it back. Keep going like that, mate. Got a crack in the ground, mate. Slow it away. Luff it back and get it down. Move it away from the bridge.
As with any investigation, to understand how this event occurred, we have to go back a few steps. Lee Lidlow is a very experienced crane operator who has over 28 years' experience in both New Zealand and Australia. And because of his experience, it was seen as a good opportunity for him to come on site from a training perspective to take pictures and document the lift.
Well, luckily Ron, he got away with a couple of cuts and bruises. It was mainly down to his really fast reactions and Roger's excellent radio communications as a lift supervisor.
What happened immediately after the accident?
Immediately after, our area manager took over the emergency running of the site, coordinated everyone to make absolutely sure we weren't going to make any mistakes and get it right. Safety was paramount.
What part did you have to play in this project?
Mainly support from the admin side and doing the critical lift planning. However, Lee and I did visit the site and we had some concerns about the structural integrity of the pad, and we made some recommendations to the project team.
You visited the site with Grant Moffat. What was your opinion of the crane platform?
I had a couple of issues with it. Size of the platform for a start. I was a little bit dubious about the edges possibly breaking away with the cranes on top. So we made a couple of suggestions along the lines of maybe concrete barriers, sheet piling, something to hold back the edges, or maybe even making the pads bigger to accommodate the cranes.
Who did you voice your concerns with?
Lee and I spoke to the project team on site. We then spoke to the senior managers in the business. It was agreed that the pad would be altered in size as well as the slopes would be tamed down so the pad would be more stable.
I'd seen loads of machinery working on both pads very safely, and we needed to get this pad closer to the lift, and we needed to have a good 45-degree batter on there.
Roger asked for the platform to be extended, so we increased the area. First laying down geofabric and then placing a 1.8 metre thick packed aggregate base for the crane to rest on.
We operate cranes off platforms like this every day. It's common practice.
What safety precautions were carried out on the day?
Safety precautions. Okay, on the morning we had a toolbox meeting. We talked about all the lift issues. We had a critical lift plan in place. We involved every person on site in the discussions, asked for everyone's input. We had the power to the overhead lines turned off for the day to accommodate the lifts, make sure there was no issues there. We tried to cover everything right down to the beams moving on and off site on the trucking and traffic considerations. We thought we'd covered everything.
Everyone at the meeting signed up to the critical lift plan. All the guys were up to speed.
With the cranes in position, final checks were made.
We did a counterweight test. We had 69 tonne of counterweight on board. We luffed the boom right back to its stops. We slewed it around 360 degrees over each outrigger to maximum load that outrigger to check for sinkage.
We tested the load on the first beam, which weighed 26.6 tonne, which exceeded the design weight of the beam of 22 tonne. So to get back into our safety parameter, we stripped the walkways and hand railing and any timber, whatever we could remove off, to put us back into the safety parameters of 75% chart.
Ron lifted the load at the front left-hand side of the crane, slewed around over to the right to the rear, luffed the crane down to put the load out towards the piers. He was about 80 to 90% capacity. Started lifting the load to place it on the piers when someone on the bridge yelled out to Roger, "There's a crack behind the outriggers," and Roger took over and started pulling the beam back in.
The crane was working at about 90% of its capacity, and I felt a jolt and heard a cracking noise.
I saw the crack in the ground appear, and I said to Ron, "We're in trouble, man. We've got to get this beam away from there and down on the ground as fast as possible."
I started luffing back as quick as I could, winching down, slewing away from the pier caps to get it away from the guys who are up there so they wouldn't get hurt, and get the beam down and onto the ground as quick as I could.
I was trying to get Ron to slew away from the road and the power lines, get away from the guys standing up on the bridge there, otherwise we could have toppled into them and it would have been serious.
All of a sudden I felt the crane sinking, the counterweight spun the crane around away from the bridge, and I went flying.
As soon as the crane stopped its fall, I ran over to see where Ron is. I thought he'd been thrown out the window and into the tide or I don't know where, but we looked up, found him in the cab. He was a bit battered, but okay. So we called an ambulance straight away.
Immediately after the accident, I called the Department of Labour and the investigations began.
So if all the pre-lift checks had been done properly, was it the way the crane was set up that made it collapse?
The crane was set up on those pads as standard practice. As you can see from any video footage or photos, that the crack appeared behind the pads, not underneath.
Why did the crane platform collapse, in your opinion?
Well, we undertook further investigation work on the site, and we found that underneath the 2-metre rockfill platform was a layer of 6 to 8 metres of marine mud, and the combination of the weight of the rockfill and the free edge on the creek simply led to a rotational failure, so what we call a classic rotational slip.
Well, look, I'm not a geologist, and prior to the lift we didn't have any of this information, but collectively we missed a major problem underground. It was invisible.
Well, the failure line occurred just behind the front outriggers of the crane, and I understand that the platform was extended a couple of days before the crane was brought to the site.
Yeah, on the south side we used a 300-tonne crane. Very similar conditions, although it was slightly further back from the edge of the platform.
Would a specific geotech report on the platform area have prevented the accident, do you think?
Quite possibly. You know, hindsight is always in 20/20 vision, and I mean, it would have led us in different directions. Would we sheet pile the area? Would we make the pads bigger? No, they were already too heavy. Maybe a possible total rethink on the project would have been in order.
The platform was built to industry standards. What's underneath, what soil types underneath, I do not know. That's not my field of expertise. And I assume that the main contractors would know what was underneath here.
Well, when I turn up on site, I expect a secure site to set the crane up on, because I don't know anything about geotechnical issues.
Although the platform was built to industry standards, we now know it's not necessarily acceptable to do that. We may need a geotech report or investigation to understand the platform requirements better. It all depends on the site conditions. I think there's an extremely strong lesson for the whole crane industry to learn from this. We as an industry must learn and improve our processes around this issue.
Do you think there was sufficient work done to ensure a safe working platform for the crane?
I had concerns about the platform due to its size and the edge protection due to the proximity close to the river. A lot of us did. However, we were all following standard practice, what we deem industry practice in fact, and that's what let us down.
Who do you think should accept responsibility for this incident?
I think the responsibility was diluted by the number of very professional, experienced people getting involved, but no one being ultimately responsible for it. Sometimes overconfidence makes us forget the questions we should be asking ourselves on every job. It's extremely important that we ask ourselves these questions, we remind ourselves of the issues, and we learn from our mistakes.
Well, the Department of Labour conducted their own investigation and they concluded there was no blame found.
What recommendations would you offer the power crane industry?
Well, hindsight is always a wonderful thing, but to me as a geotechnical engineer, there were some warning signs, the key ones being the mangroves, the steep-sided banks, and the marine mud in the base of the creek. Adding more and more rock to a crane platform is not always a good idea. In this case, the additional weight of the rock basically led to the rotation of the platform.
It's extremely important that we in the crane industry take note of the key warning signs from the geotech reports. And remember, it's the things we can't see that pose the biggest risks.
Our investigation found that we thought we'd put all the best practices and systems in place, but since the accident we have reformatted our lift plan to reflect the geotechnical requirements that may be considered on sites. Also worked through our temporary lift system and permit system to remind about geotechnical reports. We have also worked with our site management and our teams on site about providing the strong leadership that was needed. All through, Heb Construction is committed to working with all the industry to improve safety throughout the industry in New Zealand.
Like most accidents, this one could have been avoided. We'd assembled a very strong, experienced team to undertake the project, and they did a lot of things right. But no matter how long you've been around the industry, you need to keep your eye constantly on the ball and avoid making assumptions. Assumptions can be dangerous, and as we've seen in this instance, when things go wrong, they can go wrong very quickly. What if we had recognised that this crane pad location required a site-specific geotech report? What if we recognised or looked at alternatives of undertaking the lift from a temporary bridge, or pushed harder to get approval to undertake it from the permanent road bridge alongside. What if we'd just looked at the job and found another way of tackling it? If we'd done any of those things, this accident would have been avoided. We need to ask ourselves these sorts of questions. In this instance, nobody was injured, but next time we may not be so fortunate. This could have been fatal. Think about it.